All right, we are here on a client's property that is on a steep hillside right above the Blanco River. So we have a beautiful opportunity to prevent sediment from getting into that river when we have flooding events and when we have high rainfall events. And we also have the opportunity to model a method of capturing as much water as we can on this property.
Long-term generational strategy to manage the highest highlands of the hill country, harvest the water when it's just starting to speed up, slow it down, manage it, mitigate it, allow it to in-soak as high on the properties and as high in the hill country as humanly possible. We have these very steep slopes and then these gentle ledges, and then they get steeper again. So we're trying to slow the water down just as it's speeding up before it has a chance to gain momentum and cause catastrophic disasters downstream.
This is a new 3-part series about a project on the Blanco River. The challenge? Can we implement our water harvesting and capture methods and build a thriving food forest system on some of the steepest and rockiest terrain we've ever worked on? In episode 1, we go back to early March to when the project had just begun. Adam and Chris walk around the site and show us the beginnings of what became one of our favorite projects to date. This episode is one of the first videos we ever shot for our revamped YouTube channel, so please excuse some of the clumsiness. We've come a long way since then. This video is made possible by our patrons. Their support allows us to continue to share our educational resources, knowledge, and make these videos for you to enjoy.
So right here we have a bunch of flags on the ground, and the reason for that is each of these white flags here are at the same elevation, right? They're a level across the landscape. And so this is the beginnings of actually building berms of any kind, brush berms, actually using an excavator, which we're going to get to later on, to build earthen, structures where there is a trough. So uphill of these white flags or these blue flags, that's just marking out the area that we're going to excavate. We're going to create a shallow trench in the ground, and we're going to build up a hill on the downhill side of it. So what that means is that all this catchment area, there's a big hill right there, and from neighboring properties, all that rainwater, when it comes down here, it's going to get captured on this berm and swale at the same point of elevation. So we're trying intentionally to not drain it to one side or the other, so that it can sit and in-soak into the ground and then travel underground. And also we're going to passively irrigate our food forests and orchard plants, which are going to be located on top of the berms when we build them. So because we have a lot of rocky, thin soil here in the hill country, this is actually the first time we're trying this on a project, but we brought in a rock mill. We partnered with Terra Nova, it's a great company, and they came in and basically ground up the top 3 to 6 inches of the soil where there's a lot of rocks and pulverize it into essentially rock dust. And then through our soil amendment program and through some humic and fulvic acid and through microbial activity, we're going to chelate a lot of those minerals. So we're going to make those minerals available to the plants that we're going to be introducing into this ecosystem. So you can do something called a soil digest test, and in these tests they'll show you that there's often very large amounts of minerals and even macronutrients in the soil. All the NPK is there, but it's not accessible, right? Now in some cases it's not there, but a lot of the times a lot more of it is available than you would think, but plants can't access it. So through stimulating the microbiome of the soil, we're going to release all those minerals into the plants and make them more available. And improving the fungal communities as well is going to be a strategy that will help with nutrient cycling for the whole system. So before there was, rocky compacted soil, and now it's loose and rich, and this bluish looking rock, it often looks black when it's wet, is basalt dust. And this is something that we have sprinkled on top of the swale. So when we come with the excavator and we're digging the swale out, we're creating that shallow trench right here. It's getting incorporated into the berm. So this is a mineral amendment for all of our plants. It has all the trace minerals, that plants and animals and humans need because it's a volcanic rock. And you can think of volcanoes kind of like a part of the larger soil cycle, the larger cycle of creating soil. And so there's been a lot of research showing that adding basalt also helps sequester carbon, into the soil when it gets rained on through some of the compounds that get created during that chemical weathering process. So overall, it's a trace mineral supplement. It's also going to improve the carbon content of the soil. And there's another quality of paramagnetism that I know that Adam's discussed with the paramagnetic towers that we set up, but we're subtly, just very gently amplifying the Earth's natural, resonance, its natural electromagnetic frequencies in a way that plants and animals and insects can actually pick up on. That's also kind of a subject of some debate, but I think, it's just the cherry on top of all the other things that we know are based in science and have been proven to be effective.
Okay, so we have already surveyed this area for a point of inflection, the point between the swale, the uphill ditch, and the berm. So what we do is we throw our laser level up, and then we find level. So it beeps low when it's too low, and it beeps fast when it's too high. So we're looking for that solid beep. And so we put a flag right there where the first beep is. A lot of this starts with, we've designed it on computer, on Adobe Illustrator, on Google Earth, using LiDAR and 1 foot topography. But then when we get on site, you get little micro ditches and micro features that you just have to see with the laser level. So we get our first starting point, and then we're just gonna walk about 25 feet, and then we're gonna get the next level. So. Okay. And now we keep it at that same level. And it's right there. And so these flags are already placed, but basically we're just gonna go right down every 25 feet, placing another flag exactly level to the previous flag. And then once we get it down, what you'll notice is you'll have kind of a squiggly line. If there's a little bit of a ditch or a little drainage, that one particular flag will be 3 feet uphill, or if there's a little micro ridge, that particular flag will be further downhill. So then when you're done surveying and getting your perfectly level flag line, then you get down at one end and you look down the whole thing, and you can have another member kind of come down, and if this one's a little bit low, you can just bring it up a foot or bring that one down a foot. We don't want to make big changes because then we're going to have to find a material to fill in those gaps. But we do generally want a nice clean straight line that a machine can create softly, gently, without all these like multiple kind of variations in it. So we lay down our first flag line right at the point of inflection. We straighten it out just a little bit to make sure that it's a line that we like. And then from there, we just take a tape measure and measure 10 feet up, and that's the top edge of our swale. And then we throw another flag in there, and then this is the area that we have to basically scrape and paw at until it's loose, and then we just pick that up and place it over here. And once we've gotten a good bit, then you'll see Chris or Patrick slewing, where you'll have a little pile of material here, and then they'll just use the arm to kind of spread it like butter, and it makes just a really nice, clean, broad, wide swale and berm that you can drive on if you needed to. You can mow it if you had to, and it just gives you a lot of options. We've moved away from the S-curve, kind of really steep hump berm, because one reason, on the steep slopes, it's hard to get seeds to establish, and so you have little erosion edges on the sides of those berms. So now we have this very broad, kind of like a flattened Z shape. And so you get more water, broader, gentler, holding on the slope. So with this construction, with the 10-foot swale and the 10-foot berm, we calculate about 18 gallons of water catchment per linear foot. So this whole area was just a juniper thicket, you know, a classic environment that has so much of the hill country. And so instead of clearing or mulching the entire thing, we've just limbed everything up to head height. And then all that material, the great thing about a brush berm is you just laser level on contour, and then wherever those branches come from, they just go right into the berm, right where you are. You don't have to drag it, you don't have to chip it, you don't have to burn it. And then it just creates a beautiful, clean little on contour brush berm. And so these are about every 150 feet or so. And it was just kind of depending on how much material we were bringing out of the landscape. We're at the very tippy top of the hill right now. So just putting more water harvesting structures tighter, you know, place them early and often at the top of the hill, and then you can broaden them out once you get a more gentle sheet flow of water seeping across your landscape. And these are perfect areas where we can come back in and drop our mineral mix just on the uphill side of these, so that now it's not just water that's seeping slowly across the hillside, but one, we have light because we could have a lot more light on this understory now, and two, we're going to have a nice living biological mineral slurry slowly creeping down the hillside, seeping and soaking, instead of just kind of a rampaging river cutting erosion channels and exposing a lot more rock on these hillsides. So it's a pretty simple system. We just lay it down. At first, you know, they're chest high and it looks ugly, but then you just come back and just zip off the branches until it just settles down nicely. And these cedars will take a long time to break down, but we might come back and go ahead and inoculate these with those fungal blocks and just let it turn it into soil, and then we have nice little speed bumps, slowing down the water, gently spreading it, and letting it slowly soak back into this landscape. So just another tool that we have as we're working with these juniper trees. You know, it's a great tree, you just got to manage it, and we can do a lot with it when we don't just blindly cut it out and burn it, because it's an incredible resource of carbon. It's an incredible building material, lasts a long time. We can do a lot of different techniques with it, as long as we just acknowledge it as hey, this is just part of this ecosystem, a keystone species, if you will. We don't consider it an invasive because it's always been here in different pieces and parts of the landscape, and because of our management over the decades and centuries, it's become more prevalent. So let's use it more. Let's acknowledge what it is, and let's just work with it appropriately.
So whenever we're developing food systems, we like to acknowledge, appreciate, and understand all of these natural native sources of food and medicine that are already growing on the landscape. And so just standing right here, there's some good examples of plants that would historically be used as food sources. They don't need any amending, they don't need any irrigation, and they actually can be very good. So one of them I'll start with is agarita that I'm holding right here in my hand. It's also growing right here by the sotol. Agarita with these yellow flowers that smell like grandma's perfume. It has a lot of the same chemical compounds as turmeric, and if you actually dig up the roots, it has that same bright turmeric color, and it's an anti-inflammatory. I've personally used it when I've had diarrhea, when I've had other issues, to help with upset stomachs. It's also good for hangovers, and the leaves are edible. They don't look very edible, they are sharp, but when they have fresh new growth, they're not sharp, and you can eat them, and they have this lemony taste. Or you can cut the kind of like the sharp aspects of these leaves off and saute it and cook it in a salad. The flower you can also make a tea out of. And then right here, right now, it doesn't have any leaves on it or fruit, but this is a native Texas persimmon. It is one of the greatest tasting fruits that I've ever had in my life. I mean that. It tastes like chocolate pudding. It is so good. Later, towards the end of the summer, there will be black fruits on here, and they have, they have like a fairly large seed in them, but it's really, really tasty. You just spit the seeds out and grow more of these persimmons. Another thing growing right in this area is this rosemary. This is not a native, but it is highly adapted. As you can see, it's just growing wild here And we just had some earlier, and this one in particular tastes really good, smells amazing. So this is a adapted, plant or herb that we will incorporate in our food forests. There's also the mighty oak tree, which is a historic source of food for native and indigenous people in this area all across North America. That's a live oak. Their acorns are not necessarily the best when it comes to processing them into acorn flour and other goods. So in our food forest, we're going to be introducing white oaks, especially bur oak, which produces really large acorns that have a low tannin content, which means they're sweeter. They're like a choice acorn. They don't take as much work to turn into an edible food source. And then juniper, also another tree that is unfairly demonized, is also a wonderful medicinal plant. Historically, it's been used to treat UTIs and also just like kind of a catch-all. Like whenever I get a cold or not feeling good, I'll pluck some of the leaves and make a tea out of it. It's a little bit bitter, but I like the way that it tastes. And also the berries are edible, and if you get lucky, you can find some berries that are actually pretty sweet. Generally, they're on the more bitter side. And Germans in the area, especially in Fredericksburg, Texas, apparently would use the berries in their sauerkraut. So that's something you could experiment with. But the general concept that we're talking about today is when you're integrating into an environment, it's important to understand what's already growing here. What are those ecosystem functions that those plants are providing, like the sotal, which is doing a lot of erosion control, right? They're keeping the soil in place. Organic matter is building up against the base of the sotal, and this can also be turned into, a beverage, into an alcoholic beverage or otherwise. And so these plants are going to be integrated into our systems always, and they're sources of food and medicine that shouldn't be overlooked.
So these are two of our Johnson Sioux bioreactors, just a different way of composting. It's a year-long composting process. So we just build a cage, lift it up off the ground so there's good airflow everywhere. There's a small cage in the middle with the idea of no area in the compost being further than 1 foot away from an air pocket. So we can accomplish this with perforated tubes or just an appropriately sized, large ring with a small ring in the middle. And then we keep it wet and then just leave it, don't touch it for a whole year. And what we're finding is it's such a simple method. And when you're done with it, it has the highest level of biodiversity. It's really an ecological compost rather than just breaking down food waste and turning and aerating. So we get a very high diversity, and it's very cheap and easy. You just fill up once, keep it moist as it breaks down, and at the end of the year, you have a great compost, ecological compost for your land. So this one, obviously we used some shade cloth here, which is plastic. So we're doing a little experimentation over here. And Chris, what's this material?
Yeah, so, I am passionate, and I think a lot of us at Symbiosis are, about reducing plastic in our lives in general. And so this material right here is hemp. This is a hemp fiber mat that's used often for erosion control that we got from Lucas from E3 Agriculture. And so it seems to be working good. Instead of using plastic, we are, shading and protecting the soil with a bio-based material that's actually feeding the compost as well. And hemp is, high in cellulose, and so that is also going to make good compost over time. So we're accepting that it's going to break down, because that happens to the plastic material as well. It breaks down, and then you have a bunch of microplastics, getting into your soil. I still think it's worth it because of the quality of compost that you get out of it and the benefit that's going to have on the environment. But you might consider trying to experiment with some natural materials and knowing you're going to need to replace them over time as they get absorbed by the compost pile.
So as we mentioned, this is the Johnson Sioux bioreactor, but this particular design was modeled after Andy Marsh's design, who runs Rhizos Sciences, who does soil food web microscopy testing. Great local resource for any folks in Texas trying to get more quantitative, qualitative data of what biology is in their soil. So this is just modeled after her model. Instead of multiple perforated pipes, we just do a single small ring of chicken wire in the middle and then one large ring on the outside. So she's just another good superhero to know about in this area.
Yeah.
Just really briefly, one of the benefits of the Johnson-Su bioreactor is it's being shown to reliably produce a fungally dominant compost. And so many of the soils that we work with have insufficient population levels of fungi, and especially mycorrhizal fungi. And so using this method where you don't have to turn it consistently, because of that, it encourages fungal growth and restoring fungal populations to our soils. And as has been demonstrated by some of the documentaries that are coming out about fungi, those organisms are the internet of the underground and are helping to translate all the different resources, all the different currencies that plants are using for energy. They're helping to facilitate that exchange. So when soils have resources that are not able to be accessed by plants, fungi are one of the organisms that come in and help make that available.
Our client here out in Wimberley just had a new well dug, and they will be building another home here in the future. And so what we did was came and installed a power pole. That's like the user-owned power pole that comes off of the main power line. We had to cut some trenches into this very rocky ground, down to 20 inches for the power lines. So we had to use a big ride-on rock saw to cut those trenches. So we have electricity running from this sub-pole out to the well over there, and then it carries on across the field to power the front gate. We also have electricity running from this pole into this pump house. So the well is going to pump water into a 2,500 gallon poly storage tank that will sit right here. There will be an additional pump inside of our well shed here that will pump water out of the poly tank and pump it to the future home and out for irrigation water for the landscaping. So this well house is about 8 feet across by 6 feet deep. The ground out here is solid rock. So we decided to do a foundation style that is a little bit unique, but I think it turned out really well because we wanted to dig as few holes as possible. So we only have 4 corner posts. Those are just 4x4s set in concrete, so we had to dig 4 holes. And then I installed 2 2x10s side by side to hold up the weight of the wall. So that structure prevented us from having to dig more holes for like a pier and beam style structure or something like that. Plus, we didn't even want to build like a constructed floor, a wooden floor or anything like that. So this is going to be an earthen floor, which makes it much easier to get the incoming electrical and water pipes inside the structure and then back out again. The finished floor will just be compacted, decomposed granite, and the walls, which we're staining right now, are going to be pine shiplap. And inside this well house, there will just be a pump with a small pressure tank and a water softener, and a sub panel for the electricity, and that's about it.
And that concludes episode 1. In episode 2, Chris and Adam show us what the berms look like after they've been constructed. We get to see how they've performed after a medium rain, and we walk through our tree planting strategy for the project. In episode 1, we went back to early March to when the project had just begun. Adam and Chris walked us around the site and showed us the beginnings of what became one of our favorite projects yet. This episode, Chris walks us through over 300 trees we've planted, including some experimental and interesting choices.
All right, we're here on a beautiful morning right after a much needed rain, and hopefully the start of many more, which we're gonna need if we're not gonna have a super dry year. And we have built our berms. As you can see from the rain, there is, I don't think, any runoff at all. It doesn't look like the spillway was active. There's no water beyond the berm, so we had 100% capture in this little micro watershed for passively irrigating these plants. As they grow up, their roots are gonna be able to wick moisture out of the swale. And more importantly, when you do water conservation, you're also doing soil conservation. So we're not losing any topsoil, we're not losing the native seed bank. So with our actual plants here, we're doing kind of a dense agroforestry system. It could be a little bit tighter, and it will be because we haven't planted all the plants yet. Right now we have kind of our major trees, our sub-canopy and canopy trees spaced about every 5 feet. So one of the benefits of planting, a lot of times when you look at fruit trees, they're like whatever, 10, 15, even 20 feet apart. That's more of like a conventional orchard style planting. When you're planting things every foot or 3 feet or 5 feet, what you're gonna benefit from is the synergy between those plants, shading each other's roots, exchanging nutrients. There's this kind of emergent quality, this forest-like ecosystem that starts to develop much faster when the plants are actually young. And it's also more like when you see plants in nature. You go under juniper trees here, you go under oak trees, and a lot of times you see them acting as a nurse tree for other trees that are able to get just as big in time. So one of my theories for, one of the things that you see often in syntropic agroforestry systems in Mediterranean climates or similar types of climates, they use poplar trees as a biomass tree and a fodder tree. And so what that means is it's a plant that they're going to be pruning consistently to take the biomass, which when we really think about what is biomass, it's this plant that is accumulating and dissolving minerals and creating soil through this synergetic relationship with different microbes and incorporating it into its actual body, as a living organism. And we're taking that energy that it's able to pull and extract out of the ground, and after it's being sort of recombined in its plant matter, putting it back into the soil in a form that's more accessible to other microorganisms and other plants to actually break down and absorb nutrients from. So sycamore here is going to provide some shade as it grows taller. It's going to provide biomass, and even if we didn't prune it that heavily, the leaves are deciduous, and that is going to add some organic matter to a soil here that has very little organic matter to begin with. So I mentioned we have some trees in this system like Mexican sycamore that are kind of analogous to something like a poplar, providing shade and biomass. Another biomass producing and nitrogen fixing native plant is Arroyo sweetwood right here. And so this plant is going to grow up over time. We're going to be heavily pruning it to provide energy back into the soil. We're basically like almost imagine these plants as like a filtration or like a recycling system. They're pulling up those nutrients and then we're returning them to the soil, and through its synergistic relationship with nitrogen fixing microbes, it's providing additional fertility to plants like this peach tree here. And in a couple of years, their roots should be interacting. So there is a case to be made to plant these even closer, like maybe 3 feet apart, and that might feel really close for some people. It's going to increase the amount of management that you have to do. We're going to come in and plant some smaller shrubs, some herbaceous plants, ground covers, including nitrogen fixers in all of those categories. So around each of these trees, there'll be an update where they're going to have more immediate access to that kind of synergistic companion planting. All right, so right here you can see that we've also begun top dressing all the plants with these recycled mushroom blocks. And they're really retaining moisture really well. Their hyphae are expanding already, and we just put them down recently. You can't get a feel for this like I can, but you can see me squeezing water out. So it's holding a lot of moisture in, improving the organic matter. And these mushroom blocks are really good at bioremediation. There's been some studies done that have shown putting down these spent mushroom blocks can bind heavy metals. They can reduce petrochemical signatures in the soil, like they're detecting it and not able to find it after putting these blocks down. And so while there's not contamination necessarily happening in this context, in case there ever were, they're here. But really, I think part of the reason they're able to do that is they're really good at breaking down molecules and accumulating minerals. And there's partially theory here, but just with this really rocky, kind of low fertility soil, I think that the mushrooms are going to help unlock
a lot of the energy that is here and make them more accessible to plants. And so I'm trusting in their intelligence in the system by including them. All right, so highlighting some of the plants that we have in our system. Redbud here, this is a Texas redbud, and it's actually a nitrogen fixer as well. So really great. I saw a beautiful pear tree growing at Tim Miller's farm, one of the first organic farmers in Austin, and it was right next to a redbud. I mean, they must have been planted a foot apart. For those who don't know, besides that, it's just a beautiful, tree, pollinator support. The flowers are edible. And I've heard both that the seed pods are toxic and they're edible, but I'm actually more biased towards the side that they're edible because that's coming from people that have actually eaten it and been fine. You're not getting a lot of yield out of it. I wouldn't consider this like a food crop by any means, but just kind of a fun fact about it. This is an excellent support species though, and I've also seen these just growing in rocky, dry soils. I've even also seen them in subcanopy situations, so it's a pretty hardy tree. And I think for a Texas kind of agroforestry system, this is a great tree to include if we're gonna have some shade support, some pollinator support, and for that nitrogen fixing capacity. All right, here is one of a Symbiosis favorite. I think pretty much everybody on staff loves this tree. A lot of people in Austin do because it is hard to find in my experience. This is Golden Ball Lead Tree, a beautiful early successional nitrogen fixing plant that we're going to be using in our agroforestry system. It has these cool golden balls, flowers. And I don't know if the seed pods of this particular variety are edible or not. So this is mostly ecosystem support. But yeah, it's a great tree and they get pretty big. There's one at the Austin Festival Beach Food Forest, which you also check out. That is, 15 feet tall or something like that. Another one of my favorite trees to plant is bur oak. One of the reasons I like to plant this is they are adaptable to a wide range of soils. And when we think about food crops here, I think a lot of people think about fruit, but I think about mesquite and I think about acorns, which were two of the most prominent plant sources of food for the Native Americans, in our area. And bur oak in particular has some of the sweetest acorns, some of the biggest and sweetest. It has some of the least tannin content, so they're the easiest to process. I've got a whole big bucket of them at home that still need to be processed. But yeah, this is a great tree to include if you want food, if you want calories. Acorns, making acorn flour and using that flour in a variety of different food recipes is something that I think everyone should consider. On top of it just being a gorgeous tree. And we put it here at the end so it wasn't going to be shading out too many of the other trees, and it has the space to kind of reach closer to its full capacity over time. And we also selected this spot because it seems like there's a little bit of additional runoff, which is evidenced by this pool of water that's right here in front of this bur oak. All right, so here we have a black fruiting mulberry, and within this system we also have native mulberries that were grown in our nursery. Mulberry, is a adapted plant to this region. And like I said, there's also a native variety, and I see them pretty frequently in riparian areas growing in the understory. This is one of the trees that we have the most success with time in, time out here in Texas, in the Edwards Plateau as well as in East Texas. This plant is really hardy. I've seen it literally, one of our clients had chickens being run through her orchard and they completely scratched and exposed the root ball of the mulberry, and it was looking great. Like it looked perfect, like completely unbothered, had tons of mulberries on it. So it's a great, plant that's providing calories for yourself or for chickens. It's a great companion for chickens in that regard. And then as this tree grows older, it's actually a pretty great timber as well. And for anyone who's interested, the natives used to prize mulberry for making bows. It's something that I actually really want to try to do. So mulberry, great shade tree, great wildlife support tree, and it also produces usually enough of a yield for you to share with the environment, which is pretty rare. All right, so another fruit tree I want to highlight amongst the many, which we can provide a full list, but I think we planted one of pretty much everything that could possibly grow here, which not all of it's going to survive. We already know that, but we're going to see how amending the soil and creating this type of system, and the synergy of all the plants is going to help plants like, apricots and plums and things that I think, apples that tend to have a much lower yield than some of our favorites, like the Asian pear here. Asian pear is pretty reliable, pretty hardy in the face of drought and in the summertime. Just through experience, we found that Asian pear varieties do really well. And just because I can't help myself, when we're right here, again, another overlooked food crop, which is prickly pear. So when they're kind of the fresh growth and they have these leaflets like this, I forget the technical term for it, but they're not actually turning into spines yet, that's the best time to harvest the pads. And these are the immature fruits, and you can eat them as well, and they're pretty good. But I wouldn't eat all of them because the fruits are even better. All right, Mexican plum, another favorite, another plant that I also see often just out in the wild. And I'll just highlight that when we're doing our systems, when we're integrating natives, I always try to integrate natives that I just personally observe naturalized in the environment, growing in difficult conditions. That's a really good sign. So this plant is providing excellent pollinator support. You've probably noticed them if you drive around and you live in the area. It's one of the first things to bloom, these brilliant white flowers. Allegedly, they also help with the flavor of honey with bees. But they're a great pollinator support plant. They have small, edible little plums, much smaller than you're used to in the grocery store. And they're actually fully ripe when they fall off of the tree. You can still use them when they're still on the tree and they look ripe, but when they've actually fallen off, that's when they're at their peak level of kind of fertility and palatability. And they've been historically used for jams, jellies, wine, anything you can think of to use those small little fruits that they provide. And there may be some lesser known medicinal qualities to the bark once the tree is large enough and healthy enough to, sustain a little bit of harvesting from that. But generally it's a pollinator support tree, and it has, some supplemental edible qualities with that small fruit. All right, so one of the larger trees that we installed is this native pecan tree. And it's a healthy looking tree. It's a beautiful tree. It's got a fair amount of space right here. We placed an elderberry as a companion in its understory, as well as a fig. And so those are going to produce for a few years before we need to worry too much about the canopy of this shading them out. And they're also to the southern side of it, so they're still going to get a fair amount of sun. We placed it right here partially because, as the water is being captured by these terraces we installed, plus the rock terraces, including this one that were already here, water is continuing to travel downhill. It's just traveling underground. So this may end up being one of the wettest parts of the property. And oftentimes you see pecans as like a riparian edge tree. Like they don't want wet feet. They're not like cypresses where their roots are constantly wet, but they are in these wetter areas of the landscape. So hopefully we'll have some little seep springs popping up from all of the pressure that we're putting onto the subterranean water flow by slowing water, sinking it, and spreading it. And we have a pecan right here ready to take advantage of that situation and produce edible nuts. All right, so another thing we're going to do on this project is actually build another terrace in this kind of general area above the septic field, which is lower down there. But rather than cut, these beautiful, really big mountain laurels, if you ever tried to grow a mountain laurel, you realize how impressive this is because they grow like imperceptibly for the first few years. But I don't want to cut these down. Instead, I actually want to add some fruit trees kind of right here to immediately take advantage of the fact that this is also a nitrogen fixing plant, and it's going to have a little bit of shade cover from the hot sun, so we could plant on either side of it, maybe some peaches. Something to think about when you're potentially planting your own orchard or putting fruit trees in is how can you kind of expand the biodiversity from a particular area. So we're like creating a guild by planting something that's going to work in harmony with what's already here rather than taking it out. So rather than maximizing my terrace space, I'm going to use this natural, beautiful feature, and it's a little food forest. Plant a peach tree here, and then there's also pellitory growing here, which is an edible green that tastes like a cucumber. There's prickly pear over there. and then we can have our terrace start a little bit further down and add some more biodiversity to this area and harvest water and slow it and keep it on the property. All right, so here we have black escarpment cherry, which is a native. And I actually, to be honest, am not very familiar with this plant compared to all the other plants here. This is the first time I've actually planted it. It's because it's the first time I've seen it at a nursery. And so I'm curious to see how it goes. Out of the, I think, 300 trees we have here, there's only 2 of these. So it's a very low investment in that regard for anyone who's concerned or on my behalf. But I'm really excited to see how it does. Potentially adapted to calcareous alkaline soils like we have here. One thing that I'm noticing immediately is chlorosis on the leaves. And so that is this sort of pattern that you see where it's got light green edges, like there's kind of this color variation that's following the vascular system of the plant. And that typically indicates a micronutrient deficiency. And so one helpful thing to consider when you're trying to diagnose a problem that a tree is having is if it is a macronutrient, so nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, generally speaking, it's only affecting one area of the plant, usually lower in the plant. And if it's a micronutrient deficiency, you're gonna see it everywhere. It's because it's immobile, it's an immobile mineral imbalance that it has. And so since that is, everywhere on this plant, to me, it's in the realm of micronutrient deficiency. It could be magnesium, it could be iron, it could be that actually it needs to have a slightly more acidic soil. And so we just planted it and it's just freshly been amended, just freshly fertilized. So for now, there's nothing to do but give it some time. But a part of our management plan here is to do plant sap analysis, which is going to be one of the most accurate ways for us to figure out what exactly is this specific plant in lack of, what is it not uptaking, and can we amend this plant, or do we see a trend with all our other plants where there's some mineral that that is not being uptaken by the plants right now. But for the time being, we've done what we know we can do to help it support its health, and time will heal. All right, so as you'll see along all of our most desirable trees from the perspective of deer, we have a tree cage to protect it. We have some of the most deer per capita, I think, in the nation, if I don't stand corrected. There are a lot of deer here, and they are a consistent issue. Ideally, after these plants have had a few years to grow and to establish themselves, they'll be able to handle some browsing pressure. But in the meantime, it's really important to cage them. So we're using this goat and sheep fence that's 12.5 gauge approximately. It's 5 foot in diameter. It's a 15 feet piece of the fencing that we've put into the circle. And then we use this irrigation wire just as a really quick way to tie and keep it closed. And then we're gonna come in and put T-posts in the ground to stabilize this so it doesn't blow over in the wind or get knocked over by buck rub or what have you. So yeah, in Central Texas, it's really important to cage your plants in. You might consider in a big planting like this, fencing in the entire area as well, or having some guard dogs that are well trained. They are effective when they're well trained and not killing your chickens. But I had some guard dogs living outside my old place, and I didn't have to cage any of my garden because they just kept deer away pretty much consistently. All right, so where we are right now is the highest point that we can access feasibly with heavy machines on the property. And we built some conservation terraces here as well, and they are incredibly rocky. This is the probably worst soil on the whole property, very rocky soil, and so we needed to plant accordingly. And I've been saying this off camera a lot, but I'm really excited about this planting pattern and the choices that we've selected for this area, because the plants that we selected co-evolved in similar conditions. So I'm really passionate about the idea of bioregional food sources. So that means having a cuisine, like many of our, cultural food, styles, kind of ethnic foods, are generated in the context of a particular ecosystem. right? Plants that grow in that ecosystem in the wild or that have been introduced and do really well there. And I want to eat that way wherever I live, including in Texas. And so I love mentioning prickly pear because that's one of the things that you see it everywhere. It doesn't need lots of fertilizer or water, and I think it's personally delicious. Now another plant that we're adding into this particular planting pattern is olive. There's only 3 olives in this whole planting project that we're doing because they are susceptible to freeze damage, and there are, as people who are following us have seen from Arborgasm, plenty of failed olive plantings out there. But they evolved in these kind of rocky limestone soils. So I actually think this porous soil situation might work to our favor. And I do have a friend who has some olive trees that have survived all the freezes, and they're planted almost in pure rock. So pretty hopeful to see how they do in this kind of more Mediterranean type of environment, especially with the soil amendments we have. And we might do some extra mulching of these trees to protect them. But we paired them with the prickly pear. The prickly pear is edible, but also it's a companion because we're essentially planting water. We're planting water, we're planting a windbreak, we're planting, soil stabilization as well in this area. And I think that they look really nice together. So aesthetics are really important. And I'll end with this particular pattern where it's olive, prickly pear, and retama. This is similar to Palo Verde in Arizona. It's often called that here as well. But retama is an early successional, thorny, nitrogen-fixing plant with beautiful yellow flowers. I'm pretty sure it has medicinal qualities that are eluding me at this moment, but this is mostly here for biomass, for a little bit of dappled shade, and for beauty. And I feel very confident it's going to be able to handle these soils. And then we're interplanting desert willow as well with this retama, which is another beautiful early successional plant that I think will do well in this environment and look really nice with this kind of Mediterranean arid planting style. All right, so right here we have pomegranate and kidneywood, keeping in tow with plants that can handle these rockier soils and are at least inspired by this kind of Mediterranean style. Kidneywood is one of my favorites. It smells so amazing. I love the smell of kidneywood. Another shrubby nitrogen fixer, grows all the time. I used to live in a place where the soil all looked very similar to this, and there was kidneywood growing. It does usually get some freeze damage, but it comes back up pretty readily. And it's actually a really interesting plant. You can boil the bark and create a tea, and the tea actually has this very rich blue color to it. So it's often called blue wood as well. And it helps cleanse out your kidneys. So hence kidneywood. It's a great medicinal plant that you can look into. Again, support plant, biomass producer. I was cutting it back at my old place and laying all the frozen, damaged branches at the base of other trees, like we will do for this pomegranate here. All right, so another plant that I love talking about, Texas persimmon, one of the best tasting fruits. I think we've got content on this plant, but there was a few of them back here, and this was the biggest one, and we kind of intentionally put the spillway here for a number of reasons, but one of them, spillway just meaning the place where we are going to not have a berm, so you see an opening. That's where water is outlet from this system. Water exits the system when this is fully at capacity. So we wanted to preserve this tree, and then we're also directing water kind of to an area that's already got some exposed, outcropping of rock. So that's kind of naturally armored. And then this is one of the longest distance we have to the road. So there's a lot of time for the water to dissipate before it does any damage to the road. And then that's also an access place for us to get to the well house that's back there and to the upper terrace. All right, so these big rocks are just an example of the type of stuff that we were digging up, making this berm. Some people might have the idea that our climate, certain areas of the Edwards Plateau are too rocky to build conservation terraces. And that is definitely true in certain cases, but I feel like we've developed a specialty where we can deal with some of the rockiest soils you can imagine and build conservation terraces. Like these were all pulled out with, a mini excavator. Technically, it's classified as like a mini excavator. And I wanted to highlight these rocks too because they are going to keep the ground cool and shaded and protected. So a lot of times plants will actually extend their roots to these areas where there's like a pile of rocks. So I put them here because this is the spillway, so it's protecting water from cutting against the back of the berm. But I just wanted to mention as well that we can take rocks like these and use them to our advantage. And I have a friend, again, who I mentioned earlier, Tim Miller, who's an organic farmer here, who will take rocks, not as big as these, but he'll take like wheelbarrows of rocks and put them, on the north side of a plant to encourage it to grow its roots into this cool microclimate he's creating. And then every few years, he'll move the rock pile further back. And he has done that to successfully extend the root zone of fig trees like 25 feet plus around the tree, which is pretty impressive. And he's a dryland farmer, which is pretty much unheard of in our area. So no irrigation on all 12 acres of his farm. So another mentor who we're trying to leverage some of those principles in all of our designs. All right, so right here we have some more of our kind of arid landscape plants. Jujube, this is a great medicinal and edible. It produces an edible fruit, but that fruit is often ground up and used as a medicine in Chinese medicine practices. We have found that this plant does really well in our climate and actually often naturalizes. So it can pose some management challenges, but if you want to max your calories, if you want, a food producing resilient plant that you might also not even need to cage, Jujube is a good choice for that. We often see it just kind of starting to come up naturally in an environment. We got Arroyo Sweetwood right here as the nitrogen fixing companion plant to it. And then on the other side of this cage, we have our native acacia, cat claw acacia. And this is, again, early successional biomass plant, providing dappled light and pulling up nutrients, fixing nitrogen in the soil, and just being a beautiful kind of drought-tolerant plant on this berm here that is pretty much as early successional soil as you could get. But you see we have also a nice covering of our custom amendment, which is mostly biochar, basalt dust, and a few other organic compost goodies to, again, kickstart this soil and start to dissolve this limestone. All right, so real quick, I just want to plug Matt Power's book. As you can see, it's very well loved, and this has been out in the field with us. And I almost left it out in the rain, and Adam just gave it to me. But I wanted to shout him out because I've learned a lot from his practices, and I just highly recommend it to everybody who is passionate about soil and kind of trying to understand what you can do to improve your yields with everything. All right, so right here we have a Hal's Hardy almond. This is a cold hardy almond tree, and this is one of our experimental trees. So we made an agreement with the client to do 80% of the trees are plants that we feel confident in terms of their adaptability to this landscape. Of course, the natives, are within that, and then 20% are trees that we're experimenting with, things that we're accepting maybe low yield, might need extra maintenance, or might just outright die and not be a good fit. I don't think we have any plants here that I'm concerned about like becoming invasive or escaping or any of those concerns for any folks thinking about that, but more about like, is this actually going to produce a crop? So almond is something that is something that can grow in our area, and people have done it successfully, but it's typically a lower yielding plant. It's finicky, its circadian rhythm is not quite adapted to the extreme temperature shifts that we get here, where we can get late freezes, and we can also have literally like 50-degree temperature swings in a day or in a week. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes, and kind of preparing for that to potentially not go well is a hardy mulberry right here next to it. And these plants, I think they're planted very densely, but they're gonna grow around each other. We're gonna prune them to allow for a proper oxygen flow. So this is kind of just prepping for a scenario where this ends up actually being more of like a support plant, and we just chop and drop it for biomass if it doesn't end up working out. So if I haven't made it clear, prickly pear is probably my favorite plant right now. I mean, it's a great pollinator. It's beautiful. I love eating it. And as we were bringing the prickly pears up here in the back of my truck, a few of the pads broke off. So we just stuck them like pretty much in pure rock to see, because I've seen them grow. I mean, many people have seen them growing like right on the side of a cliff, in between sidewalks even, all kinds of crazy places. I've seen them growing like out inside of like a little nook in a tree. They barely need any soil to grow. So we just stuck some of those pads that fell off in these like super rocky, back ends of the berm here to see if they will propagate and establish themselves. And we will report back and see how they do. All right, another tree that I'm really excited about that historically in some contexts does grow in rocky soils is this ginkgo tree. Ginkgo trees are fascinating. They can live, I think, like 800 years in the right conditions. This is in our like kind of 20% experimental planting, but I've seen a ton of really beautiful ones growing in Austin. So I think with good care and amendments, this plant's gonna do well here. And it has edible little nuts as well as many medicinal uses, which probably deserves its own video. But this is a great, ornamental tree that has medicinal value and some edible value as well. And then here's another mulberry, just another great hardy plant that I think can handle these conditions. Here's a Texas Mission almond. So this is a Texas adapted variety of almond. Again, another kind of experiment or like a lower yielding plant that we don't want too many of, but we want to monitor them and see how they go. Here is goji berry, another desert adapted, kind of rocky soil adapted plant that has edible fruits. And you might go to Whole Foods or Central Market or whatever and see these little like superfood packets of goji berries. They're a great plant. More prickly pear, paired here with an acacia tree, another goji berry. So we kind of have this like pattern where you're noticing in between pretty much every fruit tree is an early successional plant, if not one right directly next to it. And again, this planting pattern is not completely finished, so we're gonna add a few more, companion plants to the fruit trees we have here, as well as a whole herbaceous and ground cover layer of plants that are not pictured. All right, right here, another one of our experimental plants is little walnut. It's a native walnut variety in this area, also adapted to rocky soils if my reading is correct. But I haven't planted many of these, and I do know that the walnut it produces is not like what you would get, in the store, but it can be used as like a supplemental food item. But I'm mostly planting this for ecosystem support and also to see is this something we should be planting more of when we have soils in the average plateau like this? All right, so here's a loquat tree. This is a plant that I've actually started to plant a lot less of because they really struggle with the temperature swings that we have here in Texas. But again, we wanted to try at least a few of everything that has done well. And as some of the native Texans might attest to, I have seen loquats naturalize, which is always a good sign of adaptability. Like they're just popping up on their own without any support, any soil prep, any water, irrigation, anything. So when it does grow and it does survive freezing conditions, it produces a pretty nice edible fruit to it. All right, so right next to this catclaw acacia is a pineapple guava tree. And this is actually one of the tallest looking ones that I've ever sourced before. Usually they grow more like a bush, and I expect that this will, as it fills out, grow more in that kind of bush-like pattern. But this is an evergreen tree, so it's a great windbreak. It's a great privacy screen. Like when we do edible privacy screens, I love using pineapple guava. Also a very hardy plant I've seen growing kind of naturally on limited support, and it produces a really tasty edible fruit. It's not a true guava, but it does produce a nice fruit here. And there may also be some medicinal qualities associated with the leaves. So this is a great thing to include in the shrub layer of a food forest in our area, and a wonderful tree that's going to maximize photosynthesis throughout the year.
And that concludes episode 2. In episode 3, Chris and Adam revisit the site after the July floods and understory plantings to see how everything is progressing. Episode 1, we went back to early March to when the project had just begun. Adam and Chris walked us around the site and showed us the beginnings of what became one of our favorite projects yet. In episode 2, Chris walked us through the over 300 trees that we had planted, and now in episode 3, we revisit the site after the recent flooding to see how things are going.
All right, we are here on a client's property that is on a steep hillside right above the Blanco River. So we have a beautiful opportunity to prevent sediment from getting into that river when we have flooding events and when we have high rainfall events. And we also have the opportunity to model a method of capturing as much water as we can on this property through a few different methods. One of the methods that you can probably see in the background and that we'll cover in this video is through creating these berms and swales, and that is going to stop water from eroding soil and bringing it into those water bodies and actually encourage it to collect and percolate into the ground and then get filtered by the body of the earth and then emerge through seep springs and kind of more subtly and gently make its way into water bodies in the lowlands. So capturing water in the highlands is a huge opportunity. It's flood mitigation, it's also ecological restoration because there is a greater capacity for biological diversity when water is not just ripping away the seed bank, ripping away the soil structure that can take thousands of years to develop. Really, in short, we're slowing down water, we're improving the soil, which is also going to make it more sponge-like and be able to absorb more rainfall. We're doing ecological restoration, flood mitigation, and we're producing food all in one system. And I think that's the reason why that's the reason why we're doing this.
So a little over 3 months ago, we brought the rock grinder in here. We ground down the swale area. We ground down what was to become the berm area. We flagged on contour. We straightened those lines. We got a nice clean line. We put 10 feet above it to construct our swale, and we moved all that material onto the berm. And so now we have this beautiful conservation terrace, just absolutely thriving. Every one of these plants was no larger than a 5-gallon pot. Most of them were 1 gallon, and all of the companion plants around the base of the plants were 4-inch pots. So you can really see how much growth has occurred just in about 3 months. And it's pretty impressive. We have all of our fruit trees in between native nitrogen fixers, and then every 50, 60 feet or so, we have these native overstories like sycamores and pecans, so that over time, this whole system is going to be a multi-layered food forest of natives as well as food-producing calorie crops. So these rock walls were already existing infrastructure on this hillside, so we just went ahead and integrated our agroforestry system just above those rock walls, since they were already doing some water mitigation, shifting, turning it around the hillside. And then just above those, we have our actual excavated earthworks. And so we've just, there's a rock wall that's been here for time immemorial, and then our berm, and then another rock wall, and then our berm. So we just stacked as many water harvesting structures and put our seedings and plantings just uphill from those so that they can sit wherever the water's sitting over time.
All right, so here's a beautiful pecan tree that's looking good. Underneath it, and underneath all of the trees that we planted here are, I would say, 99% native plants, maybe 1% non-native, but non-invasive plants that we have added into our understory. And they are providing benefits from being potentially medicinal, edible, supporting pollinators, just enhancing biodiversity. I mean, even just having different types of root structures is going to improve the soil over time. And Ryan and I are going to come in here soon and do a pretty aggressive prune of a lot of things. But there's a Salvia greggi down here, which we have found to do really well, and lots of pollinators, native bees and honeybees, and other insects have been seen enjoying its nectar. There is a black escarpment cherry that's a native understory plant that is underneath this pecan, and it's looking okay. It's looking like it's got a little bit of stress from just being in the sun, but that is going to change in not too long. And we also have some mountain pea, and then we have some cilantro right here. Well, this is parsley. Parsley. All right, right here we have an Asian pear tree that is not looking so good. And I'm happy to say that that's an exception in this system. But it's an opportunity for us to learn more about this particular variety. You know, Ryan's the head of our maintenance department. We're gonna come in here and do plant sap analysis on anything that's not looking good. And this is one of the best ways to be able to troubleshoot what a plant is needing to be supported and to be healthy. And plant sap analysis shows you, what is the plant actually uptaking from the ground. So we've put all these amendments in the soil, but is it actually accessing that? And if not, we can do foliar sprays, which is almost like an IV drip or something. You can think of it that way, to give that plant those nutrients in particular to improve its ability to photosynthesize and take care of itself. The fact that these are completely pale and yellow throughout the entire thing, to me suggests there's a micronutrient deficiency. It could be magnesium, it could be iron, it could be manganese, it could be nitrogen. Honestly, I'm not sure, but the plant sap analysis is gonna help guide us in that. All right, so I'm delighted to see a volunteer that I wanted to include. This is a Mediterranean-inspired system, and purslane is a great ground cover for that. And we didn't seed it, we didn't plant it, but there is purslane growing right here. And for those who don't know, purslane is really high in omega fatty acids. I think it's delicious. It's a desirable weed in my opinion, and it's just popping up here, so that's cool. Mexican sycamore is one of our fodder trees in this agroforestry system, meaning we're going to be heavily pruning this tree. So when we come back on next week, we're going to take all these lower limbs off, probably up to here, and there's two purposes to that, or there's more than two, but two of the main purposes. One is we're actually stimulating more growth on the Mexican sycamore, and so that is going to have an effect on the soil microbiome. There's going to be more root exudates being released. There's going to be more food available to the microbes in the soil, and as this plant grows and severs roots in the rhizosphere. And then we're also feeding the soil from above by basically putting down mulch, and it's making our mulch more like ramial chips. So ramial chips are like your traditional double grind mulch that you might get from the store. However, it has leaves in it, it has young growth tips in it. There's just much more diversity of wood types in it. So this fresh young growth has growth hormones in it that then work their way into the soil. And that's one benefit of pruned material as mulch.
So this client is a perfect example of a great fit for us because they reached out to us, said, hey, I'm about to purchase this property. Can y'all take a look at it? We shifted around through all the different designers in Symbiosis. We all weighed in on risks, benefits, strengths, weaknesses, and looked at aspect and slope and water availability, and then we just passed it right back to the client of, hey, there's no reason why we don't see to buy this, and it's a south-facing aspect. We have a lot of opportunity with these steep hillsides that aren't currently being utilized, so let's go ahead and greenlight this. If you feel financially able to, go for it, and we'll be there for you as soon as the property's purchased in your name. And then as soon as it was, we were able to come out here and just start working immediately. And they wanted to go ahead and get this system established as soon as possible to manage any potential floods for the house at the bottom of the hill, and to get the tree system established as soon as possible so that we could get them growing, so that anything they do once they've moved and everything is already established and the system is going. And so here we are 3 months later and the system is going. So these are living dynamic systems. So we had our best design, we built as much as we could, which made the most sense to us. And now, in about a month, we're going to come back for a phase 2, and you can see there's a lot of water coming out of this spillway and moving down this hillside. And so the next phase is we're going to put one more strategic berm across this area below us to capture all this outflow and to shift everything away from the house one final time to capture it and move it into a small food forest orchard kind of on the far edge of the property. So we'll be zigzagging the water down the hill and then nudging it off to the far left and getting it to that final resting place before we're on a cliff that then finally drops into the Blanco River. So we're just constantly looking, observing, taking the feedback that the system is giving us and adjusting accordingly as we go.
All right, so one thing that I want to highlight here is just the efficacy, and there's a bee right on this frog fruit right now, of planting a living ground cover. So we have mulch, but in addition to mulch, I think even better than mulch over time is to just have dense native ground covers like this frog fruit. We got mealy blue sage growing here. And there's also, again, this Colorado river hemp is sometimes called. I forgot the Latin name. I just learned this plant, to be completely honest with y'all. I have never seen this plant before in my entire life. So it is from what we've been told by Joey, typically a riparian plant. And it's interesting to see it just kind of volunteering here. We did not plant this, we didn't seed it. And that is some evidence that the structure of the soil, the quality of the soil, is going to determine what emerges from that. So in partnership with Native American Seed Company, we also created a custom seed mix of low-growing, nitrogen-fixing native plants that we planted on these berms to fill in the spaces in between where we put plant starts. So that would be this partridge pea here, which is a beautiful plant. I love this plant with the yellow flower. And then also there's Illinois bundleflower in here as well. There are bluebonnets somewhere in here, and we'll see if they show up, and if they don't, that might actually be great, because typically bluebonnets are a sign of a degraded soil condition. And there's also mountain pea, I believe, and some kind of, I'm missing one other ground cover, but the point is we planted these ground covers, and that's a good way to create more density, is have your plant starts in there, and you can fill in between the spaces with native seeds. And it's working good for us, and once they go to seed, we're gonna start pruning them back, and that's gonna be our living mulch moving forward in the future. Adam just pulled out some Johnson grass, and we were just looking at how much darker this soil is. I mean, this soil was like, this ground, it was like pure gray limestone before we amended it. Now, part of this is because there's biochar in here making it darker, but it's already looking way healthier. Just saw a little arthropod a second ago. But I wanted to talk about Johnson grass because, it actually is pretty good forage for cattle and for animals, as long as you're feeding it to them when it's not been wilted. At that point, it has some toxic qualities to it if animals are eating too much of it. It's also edible for humans, although from what I have heard, it is a pain in the ass to process, so I have not ever endeavored to do that. But there's also some cool companies that are specifically using the roots of Johnson grass to isolate or to extract enzymes that they are using in compost teas and in foliar sprays to encourage other plants in the system that you want to be as resilient as Johnson grass to form the same kind of relationships that Johnson grass is able to with minerals and with microbes that are present in the ecosystem. So it's something that I personally need to learn more about, but basically Johnson grass is so successful because it has this ability to kind of tap into the natural resources in the areas where it spreads. In this system, Johnson grass is biomass to us. So as much as we can, we're going to be not actually pulling it out by the root. In certain situations, we may do that just to control it from spreading too much. But ideally, we're going to be just cutting it off and cutting it and cutting it and cutting it and cutting it until we've exhausted its energy supply. And all this biomass is going to go back again to feeding the soil and creating new soil. And so whenever we can, leave the roots in the ground and allow those root structures to be fertilizing the soil for you, and don't just rip it out every single time you see it.
Okay, so this is a perfect example of just observation over time. We designed it, we built it, we had the best intentions for everything to harvest as much water as possible. But we have water coming off the hillside, missing this highest berm up here, missing this berm, and kind of channelizing right through here. So we're just gonna come back in, reshuffle some of these existing rocks that are right here, and just connect a small little, 6-inch rock wall from that berm to here, so that all this that's currently creating erosion and flooding slightly further down the hill, we just nudge it right into this system that's already built. It's ready to take it. We sometimes just need to make little minor alterations to capture those little rivulets that are starting to cause problems early before. If we didn't take a look at this and notice it early, then this could blow itself out, cause bigger problems, then we have to bring in a machine later. So as soon as we build these, we want to be just actively, aggressively observing them to make any improvements that we need along the way. Okay, so this is a Monterey oak, and when we first planted it, the top was super floppy, so we had to go ahead and stake it out and secure it to 2 posts, but now you can see it's strong enough to hold up its own weight. And as soon as we can, we want to disconnect those from any external guy wires so that every time that the wind blows, those roots are just going to continue to go down. The stress is creating strength. And so the sooner we can disconnect them from those guy wires, the better, because now this is going to continue to support itself instead of being nursed along by guy wires over time. And we see that a lot in city landscapes. Those trees typically are pretty weak because they never have to work. That work builds resilience. And so now this guy is resilient enough to just keep doing what it does. And we're going to disconnect him from his tethers and his little umbilical cord of safety and let him grow big and strong.
All right, so we have this plum right here, and one of the companions is this native partridge pea. So that is a ground cover, but really it's for nitrogen fixation and for pollinator support and for just general beauty. I mean, it's a gorgeous plant. And it is planted intentionally right here with Greg's mistflower and basil, and there's Illinois bundleflower. So there's a lot of synergistic relationships going on underground with these diversity of plants growing by this plum.
As an added benefit, so many of these hillsides are just difficult to access. So you can see it's, a lot of marbles and roller ball bearings that are slip hazards and ankle breakers. So when we have, there you go, once we have these lovely level swales, now we have, over 800 feet of just lovely walkable level paths that you can enjoy. You can access the rest of your property from. You can access the high points of your property instead of trying to shuffle around, and it might not be accessible for everybody.
All right, so right here is Stimodia, one of Dylan and I's favorite ground covers. Just from a beauty standpoint, honestly, it's also a great pollinator plant. And right next to it is frog fruit, and we'll show some other stands of it. But, it's part of our strategy, again, of trying to establish a native ground cover that is going to be perennial, that is going to continue to be here and to grow. So we're kind of planting underneath these trees in a grid-like fashion with these ground covers and then seeding in between it, and then also there's mulch. So all the ground is covered, all this mulch is breaking down into beautiful soil, and this is only a few months in, so these ground covers are going to continue to spread. And I think part of the importance of that is also we don't need to use plastic tarps to, hold back weeds from growing. We're kind of controlling for this open ecological niche by fulfilling it. And if you don't, nature's going to choose something. And it's, oftentimes Bermuda grass or something like that is in the area that spreads aggressively. If you don't want something to grow, you need to put something in its place. You need to be thinking about that.
So Chris has mentioned the many benefits of a growing ground cover. This is our frog fruit that you've seen a couple times. Right now we got bees all over it, pollinating these little beautiful flowers. And this was a 4-inch pot planted 3 months ago. And you can see, it's about 10 feet in diameter at this point. There were probably 3 or 4 different frog fruits planted, but over time this entire berm is just going to be swathed in frog fruit to outcompete the Bermuda that's trying to sneak in over here. And it's just a wonderful plant and benefiting the pollinators, benefiting living ground cover that are injecting saps and sugars into the soils that are helping the trees and our ground covers more than just mulch that's slowly breaking down.
All right, so the berms that we have built here, to me, you could describe them accurately as being in between a terrace and a traditional berm and swale. And the reason I say that is the slope of the berm is pretty much as gentle as possible. We try to make it imperceptible the way that it goes up, about 6 inches above the spillway, which is where water is ultimately outlet in the system. We also oversize all our spillways so that hopefully these structures will last for potentially hundreds of years and can handle extreme, rainfall events and not get blown out, which we didn't get quite as much rain as they got in Kerrville in certain areas recently, but we did get several inches of rain here and there's no damage to the berms whatsoever. And so what we've done is this entire hillside is now all the water that would normally just be picking up momentum and speed and energy going down and picking up soil and dust and detritus and seeds and making its way to the Blanco, it stops right here. A lot of it stops here, and then it spills over to the side and then it gets captured by another berm. Then it spills over to another side and it gets captured by another berm. So we're slowing down water a lot, and more of that water is actually just traveling underground. So we're cleaning the water as well as preserving the topsoil. Anytime we do water harvesting, we're also doing soil conservation.
I would add that over time, we're gonna know exactly where all of our new soil is gonna be. And in 100 years, we just bring a skid steer, scoop this area out, go use it wherever we need it, and we know that our soil is still on the property and it's not going into the Gulf of Mexico. So one of the challenges of this property is water access. The well's at the top of the hill, our well house is at the top of the hill. So to get water to these other berms, we punched a tight little path through this kind of inaccessible cedar thicket, put our main line of irrigation right through here, and then just took all that cedar and anything that we cleared out just right on top of it to just cover it. So we didn't trench it in, it's just sitting on the surface, covered in cedar, covered in juniper, and follows through this path. And it's a lovely little 1% grade from the top of that berm all the way to this top of the hill. So now it makes this entire wild forest space accessible. So one of the benefits of putting these tight little corridors through our hills and through our forests is we get to locate things like this. This is an escarpment cherry, rare plant in this area, but beautiful. And it's just another indicator of, oftentimes people say, hey, you planted the trees too close together. And you can say this cherry is growing right out of the bottom of this oak. And so they're just companioning and doing what they do and thriving, and we wouldn't have known it was here had we not needed to put this corridor of water access through here. So as I mentioned, one of the challenges was getting water access through this wild forest, so we needed to cut a corridor path. So we cut that at a 1% grade so that our irrigation is constantly draining and there's not just hot water sitting in it throughout the day. And as we built that corridor, we just went ahead and replanted through the area of sotol that we cleared out and sent to Desert Door to be turned into a liquor. We replanted it with all of our natives. So now we just have a native trees and plant guilds all up this corridor. So this is our sotol patch that we just took about an 8-foot swath out of just to give us access for our water and replanting a few natives. But the sotol, you know, it grows incredibly well in steep, hot, dry landscapes. You can see just how much biomass it puts on. So it's an incredible biomass accumulator, but also when we had to harvest it out of here, we sent it to Desert Door. We just macheted off the tops. We dug out the bottoms, so we had a nice big pineapple. We took a truckload to them. They put it in their giant pressure cooker, send it to their fermenter, and then distill it down to make a spirit out of it. And it's a lovely spirit. If you drink alcohol, it's similar to the flavor of tequila, but you don't get all the angry shenanigans that come along with the tequila.
Yeah, in this particular context, this entire hillside is covered in sotol, which is a beautiful sight to see. And I just wanted to acknowledge the importance of, having a bioregional diet, which is eating foods as much as you can, as much as you feel called to, that are actually produced in not just your state or the country you live in, but in the ecosystem that you're a part of. Right, so sotol is an example of, if you do drink and you like alcohol, you can have alcohol that is produced from plants that are not being fertilized or irrigated, right in your ecological context. A lot of it's coming from West Texas, so it's technically a different ecoregion, but it's very close by, closer than Mexico, where most of us are getting, tequila from. So I think there's just like an opportunity there for people to reconnect with how nature directly sustains us, whether it's from seasoning or for alcohol, which is more of like, additional, you don't have to have that, but also for meat, for vegetables, for the things that we need to actually survive. And that also ties us back into water too, which can't do anything without water. Can't grow things without water, you can't live without water. So stewarding and taking care of water, I think, is just being a good citizen of the earth. And these plants are an opportunity, they're a window, they are an invitation to reconnect with everything that is making your life possible, really.
Okay, so here are persimmons. When they're ready, they're this beautiful black color. They're so good. They're amazing. They got big seeds in them, so you just spit the seeds out. But these are all native, and wherever you got them, just keep them.
All right, so we have our spineless prickly pear. Prickly pear is, I keep saying this, I'm gonna just keep saying it, one of my favorite plants. I feel like it's like planting water. It really is. I mean, you can use it for fire-wise design near houses, in fire breaks. It is like a giant wall of moisture, and it can help to mitigate fire risk. The entire plant is edible. I recently learned the roots are edible too, and I look forward to trying that one day when it's appropriate. But the fruit's tasty, the pads are good. It's a great companion plant. It provides a little bit of shade. It's an evergreen privacy plant as well, potentially. And it's having them in these ecosystems to me is like having like living water reservoirs that are growing above ground. They regenerate really easily. You can chop and drop them as well if you burn off the growth tips on them, and they slowly release potassium into the ground. Just all around a fantastic plant, and I try to include them in every single food forest that we install.
One final fun method, if you have prickly pear around, is if you're planting any trees and you dig that hole for your tree, go ahead and take 3 or 4 pads of the prickly pear and throw them in the bottom of that hole before you amend it and plant it, because inside of those prickly pears, that mucilaginous core that holds water incredibly well. So there's a ton of different products out there that act kind of like a diaper lining that just become a gel and hold water, but that's in the prickly pear. So if you're going to go ahead and plant anything in a high, dry climate anyways, just go ahead and throw a couple deep in the hole so that it can't come right back up and cause a problem for you if that's an issue. But it holds water, so just use it accordingly.
Whenever you're ready.
So here's our pomegranate. It can take a long time for these to develop, sometimes up to 5 years or so. And so the fact that these are already producing healthy, large fruits without any insect or pest damage on the tree, we got 2 more over there, just gives us a great indicator that whatever series of events and synergies we've stacked on top of each other to create the system is working well for us. So this is at the lower end of the property, below all of our berm systems, and this has been dry as long as the clients owned this place, for about a year. And so you can see, we have some drips, some maidenhair ferns. You can tell that this is a kind of a karst landscape that tends to seep. So our whole goal is just to let these seep longer into the summer and hold more water, move more water, so it's a slow release into the Blanco River over time.
I'll add that sometimes this is referred to as the full water cycle. And the full water cycle is, actually hygroscopic microbes that are living inside of trees getting evapotranspirated into the air, and then matter coalesces around that and creates clouds, and that creates rain, and it gets drawn inland, and then it rains down into the ground and percolates, and then it gets cleaned by the Earth's body, and it actually travels in a subterranean fashion, and then it pops up in these like seep spring type features, and then makes its way into water bodies, instead of what we have now oftentimes, which is just like almost 100% runoff from developments and from human infrastructure, and it's not going through the full traditional process and seeping up out of the ground and into the water bodies. So the more that we can do this in the uplands, the more that the lowlands are actually going to benefit and hopefully have more water. So sometimes people think we're stealing water from the lowlands when really we're cleaning it before it gets there.
So a few inspiring pieces of this particular property is it really serves as a microcosm of top of the watershed down to the river basin. And we're able to see what exactly our impact is doing on the lower seep springs, on the weeping cliffs, on the wet spots that are down low. And the beauty of these systems is it's not just a system that Symbiosis in Central Texas can install. The thing that inspires me is thinking about how many tens of thousands of excavators are sitting idle in someone's backyard across the country. And any possible place on the planet that has steep topography, that has a tendency to flood within periods of long drought, these same systems will work. Harvest and hold it as high on the landscape as possible, and then you work from the top down. And you can do that over a series of 20 years, or in this case, a series of 2 months. And so as far as a potential solution to manage and mitigate so many of our problems, holding water, growing food, increasing biodiversity, increasing pollinator habitat, infilling aquifers, encouraging people to do something positive with their time and their thoughts. It's a super positive, relatively simple solution that doesn't involve complex, expensive engineering. It's just hold the water as high on the property as possible, and then work down from there. The other inspiring thing that I see is all of the data that we see about arable soils and the amount of agricultural yields that we have left. All of that data is looking at current arable soils, which is all valley bottom, plains, low rolling hills, all currently arable soils. These hillsides, these hilltops are not in that data. These agroforestry systems holding and managing, mitigating water as high on the watershed as possible aren't currently accounted for. So that's just free food, free water, free soil that we can throw into those climate models, into those food models, into those long-term population models. That's all really good news. And to me, it just really encourages us to just start, to observe where you're at, to make a choice, to gather your local communities, your networks, your available tools, and just start doing something. You know, to really encompass everything that we're doing, one of my favorite poets, Gary Snyder, said, find your place on the planet, dig in, and take responsibility from there. And so wherever you are, surround yourself with a local inspired group of individuals. I guarantee someone within 10 people of you has a machine, has an excavator. We can share our videos about how we do it and what we do. And you know, this is going to be all of us together, working together to manage these large watersheds. We can't do it alone, and so we're just happy to be here sharing a very cool project that we're inspired by. Great results so far, and just want to share what's possible in a relatively short amount of time.
So I'm asking myself, you know, why are we doing this, and how is it impacting me to like look back on this system? And I got into this whole field because I was spending a lot of time thinking about existential risks. I have a philosophy background, and I have a tendency to overthink. But there's actually a beautiful aspect of that allowed me to really understand, I feel like, the core drivers, a lot of the problems that we're seeing emerge as a consequence of modern civilization. And now I'm like fully steeped in the world of solutions and all the possible ways in which we can actually address some of the downsides of modernity. And this project is a great model of that. I mean, we are growing food on super rocky, degraded soil. This isn't like, you know, farmland of statewide importance or anything like that. This is like almost pure calcium. And there's food growing. We're restoring ecological biodiversity. We're actually managing water and keeping as much of it as we can on a thirsty landscape. And it's very simple techniques. I heard a VC guy talk about trying to move the moon closer to the earth to get more water into the deserts. Stuff like that is ridiculous when you realize like just one simple machine and reshaping the way that the water flows on a hillside can literally restart a spring. And at the same time, now you have a place where you can plant your, you know, natives that are going to be passively irrigated by that, and also, you know, reduce some of our over-reliance on this big global supply chain. I think having more small pockets of agrarian lifestyle is really important for, you know, being sensitive to the scarcity of some of our natural resources and capital, and to some of the losses that we have experienced, and to the trade-offs of these centralized food systems. I think having stronger, close-knit communities and people that actually care about their ecosystem, you know, that's what lights me up, honestly, and that's what gives me hope in the face of some very challenging issues that we are still in the midst of dealing with right now as a civilization. So yeah, it's a privilege to be a part of this process and to show that there are some accessible solutions for very wealthy people as well as people that don't have really any money at all. Just meditating on the beauty of nature is an act of resilience. So,
I think my final thought with this type of work is directly to the decision makers and the policy makers, the mayors, the governors, the president of the United States, is look at the hilltops. We start at the very top of our watersheds. Every single one of these ridges is a general plateau. Just before that plateau gets steeper and the water speeds up, let's put in a conservation terrace. If we put in a conservation, let's remineralize it. If we remineralize it, let's plant it with tree roots so that those roots can dig down deep and send that water to the depths of our aquifers and recharge our entire country's water system from the top down. We've done the massive infrastructure, the big dams. We have lots of lakes across the country dwindling in resources. We all know those bad stories and sad stories. And the solution is almost too simple to think is worth doing. But it's thousands of people with lots of small machines working on the tops of our watersheds to do exactly what we've done here, relatively short amount of times, and just doing it. Hold the water high on the landscape, and the whole system heals itself.
All right, hey, thanks guys. Appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to learn more about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, you can hop over to our website. There's tons of good articles. You can join our newsletter. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. We'd love to see you there and answer your questions. Thanks again. Enjoy.